Hey, Daniel from D7Cs. Welcome back. Hope you're having a wonderful day. You know, we've just gone through a lot of rain the past few days and finally we're getting some sun, so fantastic. But anyways, you know, today I actually want to talk about something that I've been thinking about for a while. You know, and this is something that the knife community I hear often say is that this Microtech Combat Troodon or any of the, I guess the, OTF kind of automatic knives are not really ideal or not really great for everyday carry. And so today I'm gonna actually attempt to persuade you on why, an OTF, in this case the Microtech Combat Troodon, is actually a great option for EDC, you know. And so with that being said, go ahead and turn this around. Let's get right into it. All right, well, thanks for sticking around. So, you know what I realized is that I actually didn't do a long-term review or like a video on this guy, you know. So a couple months back, you know, I got this about, I got it on my birthday. So that would be May of 22 of last year. And so I've had this knife for quite a while now. And, you know, I was just looking through my archives. I was like, man, I never did a long-term review. So I guess I'm going to kind of couple, that with kind of my thoughts on why, you know, this knife, and I think automatic or OTF knives in general, actually do make great EDC knives. And so with that being said, I'm gonna kind of try to do both, you know. Let's just get right into it, right? So if you know anything about the Microtech Combat Troodon, this is one of Microtech's kind of flagship model, you know, and it is a pretty big knife in terms of its length, right? I think the blade length is a little bit over 3.5 inches, and I forgot like the overall length, but let me see if I could kind of pull out a knife that maybe folks may be a little bit more familiar with. You know, you got the Spyderco Paramilitary 2, and right off the bat, it's longer than the Paramilitary 2. Let me see if there's any other knives I have on hand that can try to demonstrate how long this knife is. I got one of my favorite knives, is the Chris Reeve, a large Sebenza 31. And as you can see, it is still longer than the large Sebenza 31, right? And so this is not a diminutive knife. You know, it's not a discreet knife. It's not a knife that it will slip into your pocket and just kind of disappear. You know, it's a knife with a lot of presence. You know, and but the crazy thing is, you know, what I love about it is that you get a lot of blade, you get a lot of handle, but you know, it does fit. It does sit, you know, fairly slim in the pocket when you slide into your pocket, right? So it's not like an overly thick knife, but it is a long knife, right? And so you're gonna kind of get that. Reach without it feeling like a giant door stopper in the pocket, right? You know, like I mentioned, I've had this knife for, you know, several months now, and I love this knife. This is definitely a knife that has a lot of character, is definitely a fun knife, but I do want to say that it's actually a very useful knife to just do your everyday kind of carry tasks, right? And let me tell you why. All right, just hear me out on this, right? Because I think the common gripe that the knife community talks about when they're talking about like OTF knives in particular is that it's just not very ideal for everyday carry. I hear that all the time, right? And initially, you know, I agreed, right? Before I actually handled like an OTF knife, just on paper, yeah, I just felt like it definitely doesn't seem like a very useful knife, you know, because the common conversation around OTF knives is that it's for combat. It's for it's for like just like ill intent, not like to attack, but maybe as a defense tool. You know, it looks kind of intimidating. it sounds intimidating. I think that, you know, OTFs get a lot of flack based on kind of its portrayal in the movies, right? You know, usually these types of knives are carried around by like the bad guy in the movie, right? By thugs and gangsters, right? So you could, you know, we could readily kind of picture a movie scene where a bad guy pulls a knife out of his pocket and goes, "Ow," right? It's such a common kind of a picture, right? And so I think over time and with kind of the various knife laws in our country, it's kind of gotten a bad rep, you know. It's kind of has like a bad boy rep, right? And so, you know, before I actually got this guy in hand, you know, I actually never really wanted an OTF, you know, because to me, my kind of philosophy for everyday carry is that, you know, first of all, it's useful, you know, that it looks nice, that's safe, you know, that it's not going to be super intimidating for folks around me when I have to use it, right? And definitely I'm not like a defense knife fighting person, right? And props to those guys that practice that art. I definitely feel like it is a martial art, and I want to respect those guys that, you know, that really spend the time to learn that craft, right? But I'm not that guy, you know. For me, I'm a jiu-jitsu guy, right? So, you know, I grapple. I don't typically use weapons, you know, in my exchanges, right? And so, anyways, with that being said, I feel like over time, the OTF kind of has gotten a certain, it's kind of established itself in a certain niche, right? In the knife community, right? You know, you have this imagery, you know, even Microtech kind of like in their marketing and their branding, they kind of, what do you call it? Kind of evoke a sense of that military combat lifestyle, you know, that their knives are kind of built for that environment, you know. And I think it's a very clever, very attractive marketing approach for sure, because we all want to feel like that person that could just take on anything, you know, that person that can overcome any and every challenge, right? And they really kind of brand their you know, knives around that ethos, right? And so I could totally understand that, you know. I don't think it's like shallow or it's just, you know, lame or you know, it's just the way that they want to, you know, foster their image, you know, their brand, right? Their brand identity, as you can say. Anyways, so I was definitely very hesitant on getting an OTF knife for all the reasons that I mentioned above, right? But, you know, I came to a certain point in my knife kind of collection, in my knife journey, where I want to try something that I've never tried before, right? I've had multiple knives, kind of like Spyderco, right? Where you have kind of like that, you know, that manual opening. You know, I'll say all my knives previous to this was a manual opener, right? Like the CRK, right? You know, let's bring something else out. Like, you know, maybe let's bring out, you know, a Strider, right? Also manual. Let me see what else I got. You know, I have like, this is the Liang Model 18, right? So as you notice, all of my knives except for the Combat Troodon is a manual opener. Flipper, Spidey hole, whatever, right? Thumb stud opener, right? And so, you know, I just wanted to try something different, right? And my first kind of instinct was like, man, maybe I should try an automatic, you know, OTF, right? And so what company produces some of the best OTF automatic knives in the world? Microtech, right? And so actually, this was not my first Microtech. If you look in my my previous videos, I did have, I think my first Microtech was the Ultratech, I believe, and then very soon after I got the Dirac, I believe, and then I was immediately hooked. You know, I was immediately hooked with the action, just super fidget friendly. I just felt cool, to be honest. You know, to be very honest, like their branding, their marketing got to me. I felt like a pretty cool dude, you know. And then soon after that, I actually ended up, I think I sold one. Yeah, actually I sold both of them. And then I got the Stitch. the automatic stitch, right? Because now we have the ram lock version of the stitch, but you know, I had the normal version of the stitch with the what do you call it? The automatic, that button, right? So I had that for a little bit, you know, but you know, at up to that point, I really fell in love with Microtech, right? And so after, you know, I ended up getting rid of the stitch, but you know, I don't know, I might be messing up on my timeline, but essentially I wanted to have like a keeper in my collection, something that was just really would be like the flagship, the knife that really kind of symbolizes what Microtech's about, right? So when you think of Microtech, what is like their iconic knife, right? And very easily it came down to the Combat Troodon, right? So when you hear Microtech, most people will automatically think of a Combat Troodon. It's like a very recognizable silhouette. It's been in several very popular movies, with the most kind of recent one being in John Wick 2, I believe. Funny enough though, but in that movie, I don't think he actually uses the Combat Troodon. He actually kind of deploys it, and then it gets like kicked out of his hand, or it gets, I don't know. So he never actually ends up using it, but you know, John Wick had it, right? And so I think that also kind of made it a little bit more appealing to the general population, right? Because people want to know, oh shoot, what knife was John Wick carrying, right? And so if you don't know, it is the Combat Troodon. It's this bad boy right here, okay? So anyways, that's kind of like my whole background on how I ended up with the Combat Troodon, right? Now, let me get into kind of like my argument, or the reasons why I feel like this is actually a pretty good everyday carry knife, right? So like I mentioned, you know, I have knives like the legendary paramilitary 2, you know, I have even, you know, knives like, you know, a small Sebenza 21, you know, I have, like I showed you, I had a couple SNGs, you know, absolutely love the Strider SNGs, man. But, you know, so I had very different types of everyday kind of carry knives, but, you know, I generally like knives that are not super bulky, that is not going to take up a lot of real estate in the pocket, right? And so with my first point is the Combat Troodon, though it is definitely a long knife. It actually, when it's, you know, when the blade is closed or sitting in the body, it's a relatively, you know, manageable package. You know, it's very akin to kind of like a Snickers bar. So if you are the type of person that likes to carry a Snickers bar or like a chocolate bar in your pocket, the dimensions are very similar, right? So it's not overly big. You'll definitely still feel like, yeah, you have something in the pocket. It's not going to sit as, you know, subtly as like a small Sebenza 21, right? Obviously. But it's not as bad as I thought it was, to be honest. You know, it sits fairly slim in the pocket, as you can see. This wise is fairly slim. You know, I would say it's, yeah, I would say it's very comparable to like the large Sebenza 31, like width wise. Let me see, if you go that against the Strider SNG, I would say maybe it's a little bit slimmer. Sorry, it's a little bit slimmer than the SNG. And then, you know, compare this with the, let me see, the Paramilitary 2. I would say it's very comparable, maybe a slightly thicker. It's very slightly by a hair, right? And so it actually sits very well in the pocket, right? And it's very, you know, slim this way, but it is very long that way, right? So, but in pocket, you're not going to even have the blade deploy anyway, so it's not really a factor, right? The second thing is that, you know, I was always afraid of like the horror stories that I heard about, you know, automatic knives kind of deploying accidentally in the pocket and then stabbing you in the leg and you start bleeding everywhere, right? And so I was definitely concerned about that. But Microtech has this ingenious design where you have to really load up on the trigger to actually deploy the blade. So it's not a sensitive trigger, you know, it's not gonna deploy if you just touch it barely, right? So as you can see here, Look at that. I'm pretty much sliding the trigger about 50% and still not deploying. And there's a lot of tension right there. I mean, I have to really, you can see my thumb turning white because of how much force it does take to actually fully deploy the blade, right? And so there is like a inherent safety feature built into this kind of trigger system. Of course, it can definitely deploy like accidentally in the pocket, but I'll say it's very highly unlikely. You have to be very, very intentional on really applying a lot of pressure to that trigger to actually deploy the blade. And also, not only that there's a secondary kind of safety mechanism is that ooh, excuse me. If the blade, as it kind of comes out, right, like as it deploys, right, it deploys very fast, right? So I think there's this misconception that, oh, if you put this against like a soft thing, like, you know, your skin or whatever, right, it's just gonna like deploy right through that thing. Actually, it doesn't. Like when it senses that the action's been what do you call it, like obstructed for whatever reason, like it'll actually stop. So then you'll get a situation where the blade won't fully deploy and it'll just kind of be freely kind of going in and out, right? So it'll lose all of its tension so that the blade cannot actually penetrate through like something like skin, or I mean, it might be able to poke it a little bit, but it's not going to go through your hand. That's what I'm trying to say, you know? And so there's like that's the secondary kind of safety mechanism in place. So this is, you know, all things considered, it is a very safe knife. I've never had this deployed accidentally. I've never poked myself with it. You know, it's been safe, you know, and it's only literally come out when I actually wanted it to come out. All right. Now for some other folks that might be different, but I'm just saying just from my experience, right? All right. So that's why I feel like it is a fairly safe knife, and that's what I look for in an everyday carry, right? So something like you know, like a manual folder like this guy, right? Is there, you know, the safety kind of mechanism is kind of built into the fact that you have to actually manually deploy the blade all the way through, right? But check this out. This knife can accidentally deploy in your pocket as well. You know, if something gets snagged on that thumb stud, look at that tip is gonna be exposed, right? And I've actually had that happen on manual folders, right? And so I would say that in terms of like safety features, I would say they're both fairly comparable, right? One is, you know, the safety mechanisms are kind of built into the way the trigger is utilized and how the blade deploys. The other one is really built around the user having to manually open, right, the blade. So there you go. The second reason why I feel like OTFs are actually really good everyday carry option is, check this out. And I don't know, I haven't ever heard someone like mention this, but actually no, let me take that back. So you have this double edge essentially, right? You have two edges, right? So what I mean by that, like let's say let me bring out this large Subenda 21, right? So you have a single edge on this on this knife, right? So you have a cutting edge, and then you have an unsharpened, dull back kind of a spine, right? So you could use that space to rest your thumb or whatnot. Like, you know, there's only one direction that this knife is cutting, right? And it's gonna be when you're using that single edge. But, you know, with a double edge, you actually have an option to either use this edge or this edge, right? Now, the caveat to this, and this is where I hear a lot of folks talking about this, is that, oh, double edges aren't great for everyday carry because you can't rest your thumb on the back of the blade to really produce a lot of force or leverage if you have to cut through very dense material, right? So what folks usually mean by that is that, you know, with a kind of a single edge like this, you know, you could kind of use your thumb to really bear your weight down on whatever you're cutting, right? So let's say, you know, it's having a hard time kind of going through that material. Like, as you can see, I could use that thumb and just really drive that force through that, you know, whatever I'm trying to cut, right? So you have that option for a single edge, but you don't have that option for a double edge, right? Because you're gonna mess up your thumb, right? So that is like the common kind of the argument I hear about a double edge. My argument or my takeaway is that you have double the cutting power on a double edge versus a single edge, right? So what I mean by that is when you have a single edge, you're going to be using that same edge over and over and over and over, right? You don't have an option. There is no other edge that you can opt for, right? So if this edge gets dull, then you're going to have to take it to your sharpening system or strop it and then bring that edge back to life, right? In this case, let's say I'm using this edge, right, for a while, boom, 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 right? And then this edge gets dull. I don't have to, you know, take time away to sharpen the edge or strop it. I could just flip it and then continue cutting away. You know what I'm saying? And so in reality, you almost get kind of double the cutting, you know, cutting power, I would say, right? Because, you know, once one edge is worn down, all you gotta do is flip it over and then use the other edge and you're good to go. So you get almost twice as much kind of cutting capabilities on a double edge versus a single edge. That's kind of like my takeaway, right? I don't know, people can say whatever they want, right? But that's for everyday carry. I feel like if you could actually double your capacity to cut, why not, right? Instead of having to go back to your room to sharpen your knife or, you know, strop it or whatever, right? That could take a couple of minutes. You know, all you got to do is once you're done with one edge, just flip it over and start using the other edge and you're good to go, right? You know what I'm saying? So that's my next, that was my second argument, right? Is that actually a double edge gives you double kind of the cutting power and performance than a single edge. All right. I don't know if you guys are tracking with me so far, right? Now the next thing I love about this kind of design is, so another common kind of art, thing that I hear about OTFs is that, oh, this knife is really designed to stab, right? You got this dagger style, very pointy, double edge. It's meant to penetrate, you know, and stab, you know, rather than cut. So in most of my everyday kind of cutting tasks is opening packages, is actually taking the point of my knife, right? Like a single edge, taking that point of my knife, you know, going through that wrapper or the tape. And then once I puncture it, then I could use, you know, the belly or whatnot to just slice through that tape, right? But you always need a point, right? You always need a point to kind of penetrate the tape or the box or whatnot. And then, you know, and then use kind of like the belly or that straight edge to make the cuts, right? So what better is it than to have like one of the pointiest knives on the market? Because that's exactly what I use this knife for. You know, when I'm breaking down boxes, when I'm opening up boxes, this is such a great tool. You know, it just, you know, the point is right there. It's super sharp. Boom. It easily just gets into the package, and then I could just proceed to just cut away, right? Boom. That's it. You know, and the great thing about it is whether I have the knife, I'm holding the knife this way or holding the knife this way, the angle of that tip is going to be the same, right? Versus like, you know, for like a single edge, you got this one point, but you always have to kind of contend with that angle, right? But here, you know, and I always have to hold the knife the right way, right? I mean, I guess you could technically use a knife like this, but most of the time you have to make sure you're kind of holding the knife in the right position. But with this knife, it doesn't matter. I could be holding it like this. I could be holding it like this. Either way, the angle of that point is going to be consistent, right? Boom, 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 right? So that's another great like EDC, you know, capability. What else? Did I convince you guys yet? What else can I say about it? And I think also next thing, it definitely is not like the best slicer, you know, because you do have this double edge, it does it has a pretty thick behind the edge because there's not a lot of real estate to kind of go up, right? And to kind of gradually angle the edge, you know, to a really fine angle, right? So because of that, it is relatively thick. It is a fairly thick blade stock. Let me see if I could let me try to compare. It might be hard to see because you're gonna have to look at the tang of the blade right there, but I'll say it is about comparable, maybe a little bit thicker than a large Sebenza 31 blade stock, right? So it is a fairly robust blade stock that terminates at a fairly thick behind the edge, but it still cuts fairly well, okay? Yeah, definitely it's not going to perform as well as like, you know, a paramilitary 2 for sure, you know, but I bought this knife like, you know, fully aware of that, right? It's definitely not going to perform as well as like this large hollow grind on the Sebenza 21, you know, but with all that being said, it does still cut, you know, fairly well. I'll say it's maybe average or a little bit above average, right? And so it's been, yeah, it's a solid cutter. I'll just put it that way. All right. The last thing I want to say is that I love the neutral shape of this handle. So in any way I hold the knife, right, it feels very comfortable, right? That's kind of the advantages of having just like a very neutral, kind of a blocky handle where there's not a lot of curves going on, is that it's a very it lends to a lot of versatility in the way you grip the knife, right? I could hold it this way, I could hold it this way, this way, this way, you know, hold it this way, this way, this way. They all feel very comfortable. And what more do you need for an everyday carry when a knife can be held in multiple positions and be very comfortable, right? And so that is my argument for why the Microtech Combat Troodon is actually a great option for everyday carry. With that being said, I'm sure there's a lot of thoughts on this, and I would love to hear your thoughts on it, right? I just wanted to give you guys a different take, you know, because I feel like oftentimes the OTF is seen as a very bad option for EDC, but I would say it actually it's a great option for EDC. With that being said, I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you have any questions or comments, or if you just want to share your experience with the Microtech Combat Troodon, just leave them down below. You know, and if you like what you're seeing, you know, drop a like, and you know, I appreciate your subscription. All right, with that being said, have a great rest of the day, and I'll see you later.